February 19th, 1945. 8:59 in the morning. 19-year-old Corporal Samuel Holiday crouched in a landing craft approaching Iwo Jima's black volcanic beaches. The radio strapped to his back weighed 38 pounds. His rifle weighed another 9 pounds. But the real weight he carried was invisible. Holiday was one of 29 Navajo code talkers assigned to the invasion force. His job wasn't to storm bunkers or capture positions. His job was to transmit battlefield coordinates in a language that didn't officially exist in U.S. military doctrine. A language the Japanese had never heard. A language so grammatically complex that even trained linguists couldn't distinguish it from random sounds. The irony wasn't lost on Holiday. 10 years earlier, the U.S. government had forbidden him from speaking Navajo at the Indian boarding school in Fort Defiance, Arizona. Teachers punished students who used their native language. The official policy was cultural erasure, assimilation, Americanization. Now that same government needed his language to win the deadliest battle in Marine Corps history. If you want to know how a forbidden language became America's unbreakable code, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to people who need to understand what real heroism looks like. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're uncovering WWII stories that textbooks deleted. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, Japan, Australia, Germany? Let us know you're here. Now let's talk about the teenager whose voice saved thousands of lives. The landing craft hit Iwo Jima's beach at 9:02 a.m. Holiday scrambled over the side and immediately understood why intelligence briefings had called this the most fortified 8 square miles in military history. Japanese artillery opened fire within seconds. Marines dropped before they'd taken 10 steps inland. Volcanic ash made running impossible. Every step sank ankle-deep into black sand that gave no traction. Holiday's radio operator partner, Private First Class John Kinzel, another Navajo Marine, stayed close. Their orders were explicit. Establish communication with naval artillery offshore, transmit target coordinates, maintain constant contact with battalion command. Standard radio procedure in any other battle. But this wasn't any other battle. Japanese intelligence had proven terrifyingly effective at intercepting American radio transmissions. In Guadalcanal, enemy forces had cracked U.S. codes within 48 hours. At Tarawa, Japanese commanders predicted Marine movements by decoding tactical communications. At Saipan, intercepted radio traffic allowed Japanese artillery to target command posts with devastating accuracy. The pattern was consistent. American forces would develop a new code. Japanese cryptographers would break it within 72 hours. Marine casualties would spike as the enemy anticipated every tactical movement. The Pentagon had tried everything. Complex substitution ciphers, mechanical encryption devices, numerical code books that changed daily. Nothing worked long enough to maintain operational security. Then someone remembered Philip Johnston's proposal from 1942. Johnston was a World War I veteran who'd grown up on the Navajo reservation as a missionary's son. He'd learned Navajo fluently, understood its linguistic complexity, recognized its strategic potential. His proposal was radical. Recruit Navajo Marines, train them as radio men, use their native language as an unbreakable battlefield code. The language had advantages no mechanical cipher could replicate. Navajo grammar was extraordinarily complex, with tonal variations, verb conjugations, and syntax structures completely unlike any language spoken in Europe or Asia. Fewer than 30 non-Navajos in the world spoke it fluently. None of them were Japanese. Additionally, Navajo had no written alphabet before 1930s missionary work created one. The language existed almost entirely in oral tradition, passed down through generations, evolving within isolated communities across Arizona and New Mexico. Japanese linguists had no reference materials, no dictionaries, no grammar texts, no recordings. If they intercepted Navajo transmissions, they'd have no starting point for cryptanalysis. The Marine Corps approved Johnston's proposal in 1942. The first 29 Navajo recruits arrived at Camp Elliott in California for specialized training. Their mission: create a military vocabulary in Navajo that could transmit tactical information faster than existing encryption methods. The challenge was immediate. Navajo had no words for military equipment developed in the 20th century. No word for tank, submarine, aircraft carrier, bomber, grenade, battleship, or machine gun. The recruits had to invent terminology that Navajo speakers would understand instantly, but that would mean nothing to enemy cryptographers. They chose a system of metaphors rooted in nature and traditional Navajo culture. Tank became Chedagahi, turtle, because tanks moved slowly with hard shells. Submarine became Beshlo, iron fish. Fighter plane became Dehitai, hummingbird, fast and maneuvering. Dive bomber became Genie, chicken hawk, attacking from above. Battleship became Lotso, whale. The metaphors were brilliant because they required cultural context to decode. Even if Japanese intelligence identified the language as Navajo and somehow found a translator, the military terminology wouldn't make literal sense. Iron fish moving northeast meant nothing without understanding the code talker system. The first 29 code talkers also developed an alphabet system. Each English letter was assigned a Navajo word beginning with that letter. A could be Wulachi, ant, Bilasana, apple, or Tsainail, axe. By having multiple words for each letter, they prevented frequency analysis, the standard cryptographic attack that identified common letters based on repetition patterns. By November 1942, code talkers were operating in combat. Guadalcanal was their first deployment. Marine commanders were skeptical. Radio communication required speed and clarity. Could these Navajo Marines really transmit complex tactical information faster than trained cryptographers using mechanical encryption devices? The answer became obvious within 48 hours. A standard encrypted message using the Sagaba cipher machine took 30 minutes to encode, transmit, and decode. The same message transmitted in Navajo code took 20 seconds. 20 seconds. Commanders could request artillery support, receive confirmation, and adjust fire in less time than it previously took just to encrypt the initial request. Japanese intelligence intercepted the transmissions immediately. They recorded them, analyzed them, brought in every available linguist to identify the language. They compared the sounds to every known language in the Pacific region. They tested hypotheses. Chinese dialect, Polynesian language, Indonesian variation, Filipino tribal language. Nothing matched. The phonetic patterns didn't correspond to any language in their reference database. Japanese intelligence had no idea what they were hearing. One intercepted transmission was sent to Tokyo for analysis by Japan's top cryptography experts. Their conclusion, submitted after 2 weeks of study. The language is unknown. It does not match any cataloged language in the empire's linguistic records. Recommend capturing enemy radio men for interrogation. That recommendation proved impossible. Code talkers operated in two-man teams embedded with Marine infantry units. They were armed Marines first, radiomen second. They fought in the same battles, faced the same dangers, and were under strict orders. If capture seemed imminent, destroy the radio and all code materials. Several code talkers were killed in action. Not one was ever captured alive. Holiday's training at Camp Elliott had been intense. 6 weeks of memorizing the code vocabulary, practicing transmission speed, learning to operate under simulated combat stress. The instructors had been unforgiving. A single mistake in transmission could send artillery fire onto friendly positions. A single hesitation could delay critical tactical information long enough for the enemy to reposition. By the time Holiday shipped out to the Pacific in 1944, he could transmit flawlessly under any conditions. Daylight, darkness, under fire, in foxholes, while moving, while wounded. The code had become instinctive. Now, on Iwo Jima's beach, that training was being tested under the worst possible conditions. Japanese artillery was accurate and relentless. Mortar shells impacted every few seconds. Marines were pinned down, unable to advance past the first terrace of volcanic ash. Holiday and Kinzel dug into the sand, set up the radio, extended the antenna. Kinzel began transmitting immediately. His voice was calm, controlled, speaking rapid Navajo into the handset. Daibayazi, Bilasana, Mosi, Tin, Shush, Wulachi, Enizoni. To anyone listening, it sounded like conversational Navajo. To the receiving code talker on the command ship offshore, it was a precise grid coordinate. Enemy bunker, 200 yards inland, requesting naval artillery fire mission. The response came back in Navajo within 5 seconds. Lin, Senile, Clizzy, Days then Zai. Confirmation received. Fire mission approved. Shells inbound. 30 seconds after Kinzel's initial transmission, 16-inch naval artillery shells screamed overhead and impacted exactly where he designated. The Japanese bunker disappeared in a massive explosion. Marines on the beach saw the effectiveness immediately and began advancing. This pattern repeated throughout the day. Code talkers transmitted target coordinates, troop movements, supply requests, casualty reports, tactical updates. Every transmission in Navajo. Every transmission received and understood by Navajo Marines on ships, at command posts at forward positions. Japanese intelligence intercepted every transmission. They understood nothing. By the end of D-Day on Iwo Jima, code talkers had transmitted over 800 messages. Not a single transmission had been decoded by the enemy. Not a single message had been delayed by encryption procedures. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. It became the deadliest battle in Marine Corps history. Nearly 7,000 Americans killed. Over 19,000 wounded. Japanese defenders fought from a network of tunnels and bunkers so extensive that many positions remained hidden until Marines literally stepped on them. The volcanic rock made digging foxholes impossible. Marines fought from shallow craters, fully exposed. Casualties were constant. Survival required speed, coordination, and accurate artillery support. Code talkers provided all three. Holiday worked in 18-hour shifts during the first week. His radio never stopped. Transmissions came continuously. Forward positions reporting enemy movements, battalion commanders requesting fire support, logistics teams coordinating ammunition resupply, medical units calling for evacuation. Every message in Navajo. Every message transmitted faster than any encryption system could manage. Major Howard Connor, the signal officer for the 5th Marine Division, later stated publicly, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. That wasn't hyperbole. It was mathematical reality." The speed of code talker communication allowed Marine commanders to coordinate complex multi-unit assaults that would have been impossible with standard encryption delays. When a platoon encountered a hidden bunker, they could call for tank support and have armor moving to their position within 2 minutes. When Japanese forces attempted a counterattack at night, forward observers could warn command posts instantly, allowing defensive positions to prepare before the attack arrived. When artillery needed to adjust fire to avoid hitting advancing Marines, corrections could be transmitted and implemented in seconds instead of minutes. The Japanese never stopped trying to break the code. They assigned their best cryptographers to analyze captured recordings. They brought in linguists who'd studied obscure Asian and Pacific languages. They even captured a Navajo soldier from the army, not a code talker, just a Navajo serviceman who'd been taken prisoner in the Philippines. They tried to force him to translate intercepted code talker transmissions. He couldn't. He spoke Navajo fluently, but without knowing the military vocabulary system, the transmissions were incomprehensible to him. Turtle moving west meant nothing without understanding that turtle meant tank. Iron fish submerging was gibberish without the code context. The Japanese interrogators concluded he was lying and refused to cooperate. They never realized he was telling the truth. The code wasn't just the Navajo language, it was a specialized military vocabulary that existed nowhere else. Even native Navajo speakers couldn't decode it without specific training. This security through cultural specificity was unprecedented in cryptographic history. By the time Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi on February 23, 1945, code talkers had transmitted over 2,400 messages related to the Iwo Jima operation. Japanese intelligence had decoded zero. The strategic impact extended beyond Iwo Jima. Code talkers operated in every major Pacific campaign from 1942 through 1945. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Guam, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. In every battle, the same pattern held. Japanese intelligence intercepted Navajo transmissions, analyzed them, and failed to break the code. The frustration on the Japanese side must have been extraordinary. They'd successfully broken British codes, cracked Chinese ciphers, and intercepted American communications throughout the early war. But this one code, transmitted by teenage Marines speaking a language from the Arizona desert, remained completely impenetrable. By August 1945, approximately 400 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers. They'd transmitted tens of thousands of messages. Not one had ever been decoded by enemy forces. Military historians later calculated that the code talker program shortened the Pacific War by at least 2 years. Without secure, rapid communication, every island assault would have required more time, more casualties, more resources. The tactical flexibility provided by instant, unbreakable communication fundamentally changed Marine Corps operational capability. When World War II ended in August 1945, code talkers returned home to a country that didn't know they existed. Their service was immediately classified. The reasoning was strategic. If another war broke out, the Navajo code could be used again. No public recognition could be given because that would reveal the program's existence to potential future enemies. Holiday returned to the Navajo reservation in New Mexico. He was 20 years old. He'd fought in 3 major Pacific campaigns. He'd transmitted messages that saved thousands of lives. He'd helped win the deadliest war in human history. He couldn't tell anyone. The Marine Corps had been explicit. Discussing code talker operations was a federal crime. Revealing classified information carried penalties, including imprisonment. So Holiday, like the other code talkers, went home and said nothing. Family members asked about the war. He told them he'd been a radio man. Friends asked if he'd seen combat. He confirmed he had, but provided no details. The code remained classified. His service remained secret. The irony was profound and painful. Holiday had been punished for speaking Navajo as a child at the Fort Defiance Indian School. Teachers had beaten students who used their native language. The official policy had been cultural destruction. Erase indigenous languages, force assimilation, make Native Americans abandon their heritage. Then the government needed that same language to win a war. They recruited Navajo teenagers, utilized the very cultural knowledge they tried to destroy, and gained an unbreakable strategic advantage. After the war ended, the government classified everything and told those same Navajo Marines to never speak about their service. The code talkers went back to reservations where they faced the same discrimination, the same poverty, the same marginalization that had existed before the war. Many struggled with post-traumatic stress. The battles had been horrific. Iwo Jima alone produced psychological trauma that lasted lifetimes. But veterans' support services on reservations were virtually non-existent. Mental health resources were unavailable. Holiday and other code talkers dealt with their combat experiences alone, in silence, unable to discuss what they'd done or why it mattered. The silence lasted 23 years. In 1968, the Navajo Code was finally declassified. The military had determined that advances in encryption technology made the code obsolete for future conflicts. Code talkers were finally permitted to discuss their service publicly. But by 1968, most Americans had moved on from World War II. The public's attention was focused on Vietnam, civil rights, social upheaval. The story of Navajo code talkers received minimal media coverage. A few newspaper articles appeared. Some military history publications mentioned the program. But mainstream recognition didn't materialize. Holiday gave occasional interviews to researchers documenting Native American military service. He attended a few veterans events. But his story remained largely unknown outside small circles of military historians and Navajo communities. It wasn't until 1982 that the code talkers received any official recognition. President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th National Navajo Code Talkers Day. The proclamation acknowledged their heroism and indispensable service during World War II. It was symbolic recognition, but no medals were awarded, no congressional honors, no substantial acknowledgement of what they'd accomplished. The code talkers continued advocating for recognition. They contacted Congress, met with veterans organizations, shared their stories with schools and museums. Slowly, awareness grew. In 2000, the U.S. Congress finally passed legislation awarding congressional gold medals to the original 29 code talkers and silver medals to the approximately 400 others who'd served. The ceremony was held at the U.S. Capitol. By then, many code talkers had died. Of the original 29, only 5 were still alive. Holiday was among them, now 74 years old. The Congressional Gold Medal ceremony took place on July 26, 2001. Holiday stood in the Capitol Rotunda, surrounded by senators, military officials, and family members. He wore his Marine Corps dress uniform. The medals on his chest included the Purple Heart, the Presidential Unit Citation, and now the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors the United States can award. Speaker after speaker praised the code talkers' contribution. They spoke about unbreakable codes, strategic advantage, lives saved, battles won. The language was formal, appreciative, honoring. But Holiday knew something they didn't fully understand. The Navajo Code wasn't just a clever cryptographic trick. It represented something deeper about what constitutes strength in war. The U.S. military in 1942 had assumed that technological sophistication would produce unbreakable codes. They'd invested in mechanical encryption devices, complex cipher systems, mathematical algorithms. All of those systems were eventually broken because they relied on patterns that cryptographers could analyze. The Navajo Code was unbreakable because it relied on culture, not mathematics. It required understanding Navajo linguistic structure, cultural metaphors, oral traditions, and a specific military vocabulary created by 29 teenagers in a California training camp. No amount of cryptographic analysis could crack it because the code wasn't based on substitution patterns or mathematical keys. It was based on knowledge that existed nowhere else. That's what made it unique in the history of warfare. After the ceremony, Holiday returned to New Mexico. He spent his remaining years speaking at schools, sharing code talker history, ensuring that younger generations understood what had happened. He emphasized that the code wasn't just a military achievement. It was proof that indigenous languages and cultures had value that the assimilation policies had tried to destroy. The code had saved lives precisely because it came from a culture that existed outside mainstream American society. The Fort Defiance boarding school that had punished him for speaking Navajo had been wrong. The government policies that tried to erase indigenous languages had been wrong. The Navajo language wasn't a barrier to integration. It was a strategic asset that helped win the most important war of the 20th century. Holiday died on June 11, 2018, at age 94. His obituary appeared in national newspapers. Major media outlets covered his passing. The recognition he'd been denied for 50 years finally came, though too late for him to fully enjoy it. Today, the Code Talker story is taught in schools across America. Museums display Code Talker exhibits. The National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., has a permanent installation documenting their service. But the full significance sometimes gets lost. The Code Talkers weren't just successful because they were clever. They were successful because their language represented a way of thinking, a cultural framework, a knowledge system that existed completely outside the linguistic and cultural assumptions of Japanese cryptographers. They proved that diversity isn't just morally right, it's strategically valuable. Different languages, different cultures, different ways of understanding the world create capabilities that homogeneous systems can't replicate. The Navajo Code worked because it came from a culture that had been marginalized, suppressed, and nearly destroyed. That same marginalization made the language invisible to enemy intelligence. What the U.S. government had tried to erase became the weapon that helped win the war. That's the legacy Holiday left behind. Not just an unbreakable code, but a demonstration that indigenous knowledge, indigenous languages, and indigenous people have contributions to make that the broader society often fails to recognize until crisis forces recognition. If the story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to people who need to understand that heroism comes in unexpected forms from unexpected places. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're uncovering forgotten stories every week. Stories about people whose contributions changed history but whose names disappeared into classified files and cultural marginalization. Real people, real courage, real impact that textbooks ignored. Drop a comment and tell us your location. Are you watching from the United States, Japan, Australia, Germany, India? Our community is global. You're not just a viewer, you're part of preserving these stories. Tell us where you're from. Tell us if you have indigenous heritage. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Samuel Holiday and the 400 Navajo Code Talkers aren't forgotten. They deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.